Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to 2CTV, your global news channel. We come to you guys with some breaking news from the Caribbean as tensions between the United States and Venezuela are increasing following the recent 3 strikes by the US military on the drug cartel vessels in South America. Of course, Maduro and his communist minions are not learning the lesson, and they continue to target the American citizens. Of course, President Trump has promised to do a massive crackdown on this, and we have the latest updates. We have a number of images to show you in terms of the map, what's going on in and around Venezuela. We're also getting updates that the Russians are now have arrived to support Maduro's regime. All right, first things first. We're going to get your reaction to the live chat as usual. Let's talk about the US aircrafts, including F-35s and also MQ-9 drones remain active near Puerto Rico. And with the White House, of course, now saying that the Maduro regime is ending. Things are definitely heating up. This has gone beyond the overall issue of the South American drug cartels obviously causing chaos in America. This is actually about Maduro and his regime itself, because his existence is causing a lot of trouble for ordinary American citizens. But of course, geopolitically as well, is a major problem for everybody concerned. Now, Maduro asked the Islamic Republic of Iran, China and Russia to send support. The IRGC are very quiet. They're not doing anything. China have said we're going to stay out of this, but Russians have sent support, which we're going to discuss shortly. But first, I'm going to tell you what happened last night, because since last night, Trinidad and Tobago, the Defense Forces actually, TTDF, they were placed on State 1 alert. Now, this is the highest readiness alert that they have in the country, and one of the major issues around the territory is just the location of the vessels outside of it. But last night there were a lot of speculations, especially on social media, a lot of fake news that the Americans were about to attack, or the Americans have already attacked. But of course, that's not the case. So whatever happened last night was just to test the waters. The American troops have, at that point, were not fully there yet. But now more of them have arrived in the region, which we're going to show in a second. But as we speak, there is a problem with GPS disruptions. Obviously, things continue to heat up since last night, but there's a sudden and irregular spike in GPS disruptions that we can actually confirm on a GPS jam map over Venezuela. Now, of course, the US forces are now stationed near there. We don't actually know who is responsible for the GPS jamming. It could be the Americans, or it could be the Venezuelans, or it could be basically any other foreign actor that is involved with their proxies over there. That they don't want the Americans, of course, to do anything. But the US Marines, they have also been quite busy this morning. First things first, there is an issue, before we get to the Marines, there's an issue with Puerto Rico, because again, last night, that's where a lot of speculations came from last night. The US closed off the airspace near the area with a NOTAM announcing that hot pit refueling at the local airport. So a lot of people thought that, well, that means that they are imminently going to go and attack Venezuela yesterday. That wasn't the case. Now, obviously, their hot pit refueling simply means that aircrafts are refueled with their engines still running. So that's why a lot of people thought that, well, maybe the attack is imminent last night, because they want to take off quickly. That didn't actually happen. And there was a reporter that asked President Trump on Air Force One last night whether the attack on Venezuela was imminent. He said no. He basically said, not today. He didn't say never. He said, not today. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe tomorrow. So that happened. That was the issue around that problem. But going towards the problem of the preparations for this, because the US Marines have conducted training operations in Puerto Rico, again, yesterday and today, in preparations for everything that could come shortly. There is a lot of speculations about the role of the Wagner Group and the Russians because they are now present in the area, but we still don't know exactly how active they might be, or is this just some sort of bluff to basically. Well, Russia has to send support to Venezuela because they are allies, but will the Russians actually do anything? We're going to talk about that in a second. But the rhetoric from the White House, the Republicans, and also Congressman Carlos Gimenez has been very robust, saying Venezuela will be free. This was last night. We also had the same situation from the White House briefings. The narrative now from the US government is Maduro has to go and Venezuelans will be free. Not should be free, will be free. So it seems like whatever's cooking could be the end of Maduro. And we've also obviously had President Trump and the opposition in Venezuela being extremely closer than before, even closer than when CIA was simply just providing intel and support to the opposition. This is more of a vocal and public support. So things could be happening very, very quickly unless the game is changed last minute. Now, speaking of the US government, before we get your reaction in the live chat, the Trump administration are considering the airstrikes on Venezuelan military bases, ports, and airfields. These have been said to be used by the Cartel of the Suns. This is the drug network, the Cartel of the Suns. And according to the sources in Washington, the top officials close to Nicolas Maduro have actually considered to double down and send more support indirectly to the cartels. So this whole thing, it's not really just about Venezuela, because this is actually about the wider network of criminals and obviously drug cartels all around South America. And all of them somehow get connected back to Venezuela, even if they are in Colombia. So this is one of the biggest issues we've had. And over the last week or so, we've been reporting on this channel, a number of issues that other countries have also faced. Even Brazil. Obviously, we had the massive operation against the cartels, which turned into a civil war on the streets. And today, by the way, there are protests still in Rio, in Brazil, against it, by the way. A lot of people are now attacking the government in Brazil and the special forces, saying that you guys didn't just target the cartels, you also targeted the civilians, innocent citizens. So we still don't know who's telling the truth in Brazil, but the cartels also get connected back to Venezuela. That is basically become the norm. Everything goes back to Maduro because that's how he's funding his regime. Because of course, other than that, the whole country, the whole economic system in Venezuela has been collapsing anyway. Now, going back to the support that Maduro has been asking from Iran, China, and Russia. Iran and China, pretty quiet. I mean, China, they could be quiet, but they could still do things behind closed doors. Russians have actually transported some stuff. So we have the evidence now, and a Russian Il-76 military transport plane, the massive ones, which is linked to the Wagner Group, has now landed in Venezuela. Now, the Il-76 is operated by Aviacon Zilop which is a company sanctioned by the US government, as well as Canada and the others, because of their ties to the Russian military structures, including the deliveries of equipment that they send to the mercenaries, including the Wagner Group. So that has now arrived in Venezuela. So this is again, at least symbolically important, because that's basically Russians are saying, well, our friend Nicolas Maduro asked us for help. Of course, we're going to be there. Why not? This is just normal behavior. Having said that, the details of this aircraft. So the arrival came shortly after Maduro appealed to the three countries. Russia responded. Obviously, they simply wanted increased military support. Directly, by the way, because they asked for military support, not just diplomatic support. That's why Iran and China couldn't really do much. Iran can't really send any military support because they don't have anything. China can't really send military support because we have a Cold War with the Chinese Communist Party. If they send military support directly to Venezuela now, it's a little bit OTT and they will be showing their true cards. Now, the flight was seen as Moscow's attempt to expand their military presence in Latin America. There is no more comment coming from the Kremlin, apart from the fact that, of course, we are supporting our friend Nicolas Maduro and his communist gang. That aside, there's also a situation with the satellite imagery that we have also received. The latest satellite images showed two destroyers conducting, US destroyers, conducting live fire boat drills less than 200 kilometers from Venezuela's coast. So that's pretty close. And at the same time, the USS Gerald R. F. Ford, which is America's most powerful aircraft carrier, is steaming towards the Caribbean with a full strike group in tow. Now, the United States has also authorized covert CIA operations in Venezuela, and flight data confirmed that the bombers and F-35s are now actively operating in the region. They haven't hit anything yet, but this is a message that we are ready and we can take you out any moment. And I don't really think, even if the Russians are there, they can't really get involved, actively engage with the Americans, because that will be war with America. They simply just going through the mercenaries and Wagner Group saying, well, it was nothing, it had nothing to do with Putin, even though he confirmed that he's sending support. So that's the situation with Moscow. But talk about the communists and socialists and weirdos. Let's talk about my favorite, of course, Gustavo Petro. He's also having a bit of a meltdown in Colombia. The Colombian president is now crying like a baby, and he's going to tell the international bodies that President Trump is mean. So Petro has now gone to the United Nations saying, oh, President Trump is being really, really rude by striking the drug cartels. How dare he? He's dragging Trump to the UN, and he wants to sue the US government for targeting the drug boats. They are accusing President Trump and the United States of doing executions in international waters. Nothing to do with you. If you say that the drug cartels are not officially linked to the Colombian government, then why are you offended on behalf of a bunch of criminals? So Gustavo Petro has now filed a formal complaint with the UN Security Council, like a baby, calling the operations illegal and destabilizing. And is also, by the way, he didn't just stop with the United Nations, because, of course, that's not enough. He also went to another left-wing organization, the Amnesty International. Yes, Amnesty International, saying that we have enough data from Amnesty that over 60 to 61 deaths have been confirmed since September, and everybody is innocent people. Everybody who was killed on the drug boats were innocent people, according to the Amnesty International, United Nations, and Gustavo. We don't really care about this guy, but we have the latest numbers on the US troops. So 6,000 US troops and soldiers are now streaming into the Caribbean, along with the, as we said, the carriers, the F-35s, and also a nuclear submarine. Obviously, that's not going to be used. That's just part of the crew. And it's a whole spectrum. The thing has now changed from fighting the drug cartels to essentially bringing down the Maduro's regime. I'm not really sure how the United Nations or Amnesty International or any other left-wing international body can actually try to stop President Trump. What are they going to do? Use CNN and CBC in Canada to say, oh, the US government is very mean, we need to be nicer to each other. Come on, guys. The drug cartels, they're just hard-working business people. You need to support small businesses. It's gone beyond that, because they're not just the cartels, they're also literally linked to the government. It's embarrassing. If President Trump is claiming that he wants peace, if President Trump says that he wants to fight for American people to keep them safe and protected, you have to do carrot and sticks. You can't go around like the previous stupid presidents say, well, we want world peace, and then they start random wars for no reason. And you also can't go around say, well, what we should do is, because we want peace, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to send angry emails to the enemy. No, You eliminate the threat before it becomes a big problem. And it already is a big problem. It's not really just about the fact that, well, there's a group of drug dealers bringing in drugs to America. That's not the point. That is not even the major issue here. The major issue at this point is the fact that these cartels are connected to the government in South America. And secondly, they are using that money to fund their dictatorships to then use against America again. So it's an imminent threat which is already happening. That is the truth behind why President Trump does carrots and sticks. He would use the stick to then give you the carrot afterwards. You have to strike the enemy in order to have peace. Same thing with Gaza, in Hamas in Gaza, saying, well, we have to do something about them. We can't just say, please, Hamas, can you stop being mean to Israel? That's not how it works. Now, Jess says Trump protects Americans and the Democrats starve them. Yes, and of course, the Democrats who've been dragging on this government shutdown is also not really helping. That just proves that they don't really care about ordinary people. I'm just getting some latest update on the situation just outside Venezuela. Kamal says Colombia's useful idiot, President Gustavo Petro, is also a problem. He backs Maduro and has aided the cartels in Venezuela under Maduro's protection. Yeah. Petro also hates Israel. Yeah, this is by nature. Being left-wing and hating the Jews and America. There are thousands of Hezbollah and IRGC in both countries. So obviously, in terms of the direct IRGC officials, they are mostly in Venezuela. But you also do have, obviously, Hezbollah operatives in both Colombia and Venezuela. But they are still, the Iranian regime officials themselves are in Venezuela. Venezuela is supposed to be the safe haven. Venezuela was always supposed to be, if the Islamic Republic falls, they all flee to Venezuela. And President Trump is basically also taking away the IRGC's safe haven. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole in terms of analysis and conspiracy theory, you would say, well, it seems like President Trump is not done with the Islamic Republic, right? So there was a pause, but it seems like the IRGCs are still on their way out. What could happen before that? Well, get rid of the safe haven, which is Venezuela. But again, there's no evidence that that's one of the motives. That just could be a very, very nice coincidence that by having Maduro falling in Venezuela, the IRGC will also lose a major, major base. Greta Thunberg will have a flotilla to provide humanitarian relief to the family of the lost cartel boat crews. That's the thing, by the way. We keep joking about this, but I'm actually serious that you might, if this escalation gets worse and there is a direct conflict within the next few hours or day or two or whatever, the narrative, the propaganda from the liberal media and the left-wing activists like Greta is going to be trying to spin it and say, okay, the Americans are saying that they are fighting against criminals, but there will be collateral damage, right? Families of the cartels, or their junior interns, or to some people who are just standing around becoming collateral damage, right? They're gonna start a whole movement saying that President Trump is now doing genocide in Venezuela. That's gonna be the narrative. There is going to be protests in London. There is going to be protests even in Toronto, in New York, and elsewhere, because they're gonna say, stop the war with Venezuelan people. There is no war with the people of Venezuela. That is not the point of this. The point of this was, for the past few months, there were 3 airstrikes on the actual cartels directly. That wasn't enough. Now the idea is, if needed, we're going to have to hit them on the ground, which means technically you're hitting the Venezuelan government and military. That's still nothing to do with the people of Venezuela who don't even want Maduro in charge. They want freedom. Now this isn't really, again, directly speaking, President Trump liberating the Venezuelans. That will just be a bonus as part of what's going on. Because they are struggling. They've been struggling with the revolution against Maduro. But the time might be here. We don't know. Putin also sent arms to Ortega. Yeah. Well, I'll get back to the Russian influence, but let's just see. Someone told a useful idiot, Tucker Carlson, that Putin is an enemy and trying to dominate the Americans. The thing is, it's all about perspective. one person's terrorist is another person's hero, right? People think, some people, it's about like black and white. Well, we don't like the Western government, so Putin is a good guy, or Xi Jinping is a good guy, or Khamenei is a good guy, just because we don't like our corrupt politicians. That's not really how it works. You have two major players here. You got the American empire, and of course, the rest of the Western globalists. And the Western globalists is a wider umbrella that includes the liberal governments in Europe and the European Union. But you also then, you don't really have the opponents to that. The opponents, the opposition to that is not sovereign nationalist countries who simply want to take care of their people. That is not what China is about, or Iran, or any of those countries. The opposition to that, to the Western globalist bloc, is the Eastern globalist bloc led by China and Beijing. And it's about perspective. Now, the propaganda is that the West would say, well, the overall West, not the American empire, just the West in general. So the British government or the Canadians would say, or the French, we are pro-democracy, we are pro-freedom, we are the good guys. Everybody else is bad. Okay. But then they're not honest about the fact that, well, we have interests in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia. Sometimes they end up doing military interventions. They're not honest. The American empire, especially under President Trump, is honest. We are the American empire. We are there. We have to police the world because otherwise the other side will police the world. You don't live in a fantasy world where every country will just look after themselves. Oh, well, yeah, of course, I'm just going to be a nationalist country. I'm just going to look after my people. There is going to be a gap in the market. Someone is going to fill it. You don't want it to be China. You also don't want it to be France or Canada. That's a terrible idea because it's not really just about if the Americans stop policing the world. It's not really good. Ideally, you don't want anybody to police the world. I know that. Ideally, you want countries to just look after their people. But that's not the real world. If America pulls away, it's not really just that the opposition would be China filling it. The alternative could also be the European Union. You also don't want the Europeans in charge. You do not want the Europeans in charge of the world. First, they'll collapse within 10 minutes. But it's about the perspective. So, in the UK, we say the Fabian society mentality, but in Europe, let's just say the European Fabian mentality, which is basically the World Economic Forum mentality. You got that side, then you got the American empire, which is basically the dollar empire, and you've got BRICS, which is basically led by China. You got three major players, and everybody else in the middle are just proxies. But yes, the whole point to respond to this comment was the fact that when the supporters of, for example, the Western side say, "But we are the good guys. We are never. We made mistakes in the past, but we're not imperialists." And then the supporters of, for example, Russia would say, "Yeah, the imperialists are the Westerners. That means Putin and Russia are definitely, or China are definitely not imperialists. They know they're just nationalist countries. They care about their people." You literally have Russian troops and bases in South America, Central Africa, North Africa, East Africa, Asia, the Middle East. It's not just the Americans that have bases everywhere because, of course, it's the American empire. You also have the opposition, which makes sense. If the Americans are somewhere, the Chinese are going to be there as well. If China is somewhere, America is going to try to get there as well. It's just the part of the geopolitical structure. The subs can carry over 100 Tomahawk missiles. Yeah, I think one of the major mentions was about the Tomahawk missiles, which they won't really have to use them, but if they use one, it'll be major. Now, it's similar to operations against yeah. Well, again, we don't know the level that we're going to be seeing soon. Any chance of you looking into Dearborn, Michigan, and how bad it's overrun by bad actors? Yeah, we've done a report on 2CTV quite recently, actually, about the Islamist problem in Michigan. Of course, the other day we also had a terrorist plot that was foiled by the American government and the authorities. But yeah, we've talked about Michigan a lot. We will, of course, continue to cover the issues around Michigan and Islamism. It's a completely messed up place right now. And the demographic is changing rapidly. Brent says this is sold as war on drugs, which is correct on one level, but the deeper level is the oil. It also goes beyond oil. So yeah, it's not just about the drugs. It's also not just about oil because it's not the 1960s. The oil thing is still a major issue as a result, but it goes beyond that because the game is now about geopolitics. The game is also about territory. The game is also about the geopolitical influence, because the bigger enemy for the American side, and at the end of the day, it's still China. And the Chinese influence through Russia, through Iran, through Venezuela, they basically, all these little countries are China's proxies. No, Russia's not China's proxy, obviously, but the Wagner Group, for example, being in Central Africa, they are still collaborating with China. Now, that's why I rather call it the triangle rather than the axis. The literal version of a triangle of Russia, Iran, and China. I always say it's not that the fact that they are always allies on every level. Sometimes it's the three of them. Sometimes it's Russia and Iran on one side. China is not really on that side. On some other issues, it's Russia and China. Iran is on its own. On some issues, Iran and China, and Russia stays out. And they also don't trust each other fully. It's not because, oh, they're just best friends. Look, we have terrible people in charge of our governments, like that clown Mark Carney in Canada, or that mini Macron in France. They have terrible leaders. They're all corrupt. They're all bad. They don't trust each other. Look at the other side. They seem strong and stable, and they seem to be operating well. They also don't trust each other. You really think if Xi Jinping offers Putin a glass of water, he's just going to be like, yeah, sure, I'm going to take it? There's going to be checks beforehand. So nobody trusts anybody. It's just about the persona. Anyway, Candace says, Tusi is right. China moves, we move. They move, we move. Exactly. It's not really just about good guys or bad guys. This is just part of geopolitics. Next thing we'll see is a Thunberg. Is a Thunberg doom goblin flotilla to help Maduro. Yeah, someone else said that as well. PBTV says, just staying high, Tusi and co. Stay safe, everyone. Try not to react and create civil conflict. Yeah, don't do civil conflict. Starmer wants us to use martial law and stop elections. That's a good point, by the way. Expect Tuk Tuk, as in Tucker Carlson, Tuk Tuk, and Al Jazeera to blame Israel for this. Yeah, I think they're just going to blame the Jews. Why not? Jen says the USA-led regime change in Iraq and Saddam Hussein's lasted 8 years and cost was $2 trillion. That was a terrible idea. USA ready for a long-term war with in Venezuela? Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be. So not everything, again, I always say not everything is black and white, and not everything is about, well, somebody dropped a glass of water 2 weeks ago. If I hold a glass of water, that means I'm going to drop the glass of water. No, that's not how the real world works. If you see like a movie, like a video game, well, we had a bad war in 2003, and that was the outcome. That means every other conflict, even in self-defense, will be like that messed up war with Iraq. No, the Iraq war was a whole different issue. Shouldn't have happened anyway. It was chaotic. It was based on lies, and the exit strategy didn't exist, and they messed the whole thing up. And they've also lost the influence that they wanted to have. The whole point of that wasn't really just about get rid of the Saddam or liberating the Iraqis or even get some oil. The point of that was for the Western side to have full influence in the region. They've lost that. It's been embarrassing. Nobody says use the Iraq example as the best case study, or separately, whatever, Libya. Libya was a whole different thing as well. And the operation against Libya was different compared to Iraq. They didn't need to fully invade because they had enough airstrikes to just completely bring down Gaddafi, and CIA was very active there. No one says every war will be like that. That was a different outcome. Iraq was a different, the outcomes were both negative from the Western's perspective, but doesn't mean that you shouldn't defend yourself when a bunch of communist drug cartels are going around causing trouble. Maduro literally is an idiot. He changed the Christmas date in Venezuela. He is an idiot. I don't like dictators that actually are stupid and they are basically just using ruthless methods. Be smart. I would say Xi Jinping is relatively clever, or has been clever, but now the whole thing is backfiring in China against Xi Jinping. But, he tried his best to be a clever dictator. But Maduro is just a fat idiot. Kamal says Trump needs to call out a grifter, Pedro Sanchez, by name. Okay. Anyway, we have all this, but then there's a whole issue of what will the others do, because the reaction to this conflict we've already seen from the left when the Americans were hitting their drug boats over the last few months. Essentially, the liberal media and the left were attacking the American government for defending the American people. Targeting the drug boats had nothing to do with invading a country, and it has nothing to do with even hitting civilians, right? There are a bunch of criminals there. Take the boat. Even if no one's on the boat, there will be drugs on the boat. Anyway, we have my father, who's watching with a VPN from Tehran, saying the Islamic Republic regime must change as soon as possible so that the Middle East can calm down. That's a direct message from inside Iran. Yes, absolutely agree. Anyway, yeah, Robert says Iraq is different, very different, very different people, different religion. Yes, but that was the other thing. So one of the lies was we're gonna give them democracy. With what culture? It was a bit of a mess. They didn't know. Of course, the first election was completely corrupt, rigged. People got killed for no reason. There were literally 2 people who got killed during the first election in Iraq because the enemy, the other side, thought they were candidates. They weren't even candidates. They were just walking around. But Venezuelans, obviously, they are very different people. You know, there's a massive, huge Christian mentality there, and they also believe in freedom, just like the lovely people in Cuba who believe in freedom. You've seen anybody that you meet in Florida, the older generation that fled countries like Cuba when communism came. They believe in life and freedom. They believe in opportunity, and they believe in Americanism. They might still be proud Cubans, but they are very much also American. And that is a difference between culture and mentality. It's also about geography. It's also about the history of that nation. Iraq was a mess. I mean, worse than Iraq was Afghanistan, because it was just a desert with a bunch of tribal idiots. You can't even tell them, here's democracy. You can't even give them a government, because the only time that Afghanistan was relatively stable was when it was part of the Persian Empire. So that was the only time. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we'll keep you guys posted on this issue with the escalation between the Americans and Maduro's communist minions. If you want to get more out of this channel, if you also want to support us, the best way is to join as a member to support our independent new media revolution. And become a member of 2CTV Plus by scanning the QR code, or just go on directly on 2c.tv. Download the 2CTV app from your app stores. If you join today, you can see at the bottom of the screen, you get 10% off annual memberships if you use the promo code YT10. Go on 2c.tv. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Maya 2C, and we are the media.